One of the biggest announcements of the 2020 presidential race has yet to be made. Who will presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden choose as his running mate? With us today, one of the premier political commentators on television, who is also a Connecticut native, Chris Cillizza of CNN. Chris, great to see you back here in the program.
Oh my gosh, it's a thrill. Thank you for having me.
And the Loomis Chafee Alumni Club is going to be very excited because our previous guest, Paul Mounds, is also a Loomis alum, as are you.
We are. You just have to have Frank Bruni of the New York Times on next, and we'll have everybody from Loomis covered.
We will book him. We will book him. So every Thursday, I look forward to your rankings of the vice presidential potential candidates. Kamala Harris has been number one for quite some time. Is she still up there?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I think it's important to remind people, Joe Biden said in the last debate with Bernie Sanders, which was just before everything shut down in March because of the coronavirus, Joe Biden pledged he would pick a woman. Okay, so right then we've got little less than half of the population entirely eliminated. So now we're focused just on women. I've had Kamala Harris, the California senator, number one, as you said, Dennis, since the start of these rankings, which I started doing about 6 months ago, which some people thought was too early. But the reason for it is relatively simple. She's from a huge Democratic state, both in terms of votes, obviously California, the largest state in the country, but also, and this is important, in terms of fundraising. Joe Biden is going to have to raise a lot. He is raising a lot of money. He's going to have to raise a lot more money to compete with Donald Trump on the airwaves. Kamala Harris helps with that. She also is the first African-American and first Indian-American woman elected to the Senate in California. She was elected in 2016. She is also someone who was the state attorney general in California prior to that. So there's a lot to recommend her there, particularly, and I'll add, this is sort of a late arriving thing, started way after I started doing the rankings, but with the death of George Floyd and the focus on race and that conversation on race and policing in our country, there's been even more talk in the Biden inner circle of picking a woman of color, which obviously Kamala Harris is.
Now, she doesn't necessarily help demographically, though. She could help in the cities across the Midwest. Is there a Midwesterner who's part of this mix at all?
You know, what's interesting is we've seen that fall off a little bit. I always warn people, VP picking is like throwing a dart blindfolded, right? You hope that you hit the dartboard. Sometimes you hit the guy standing next to the dartboard. So it's always difficult to decide what they're picking on. Geographic picks, in my opinion, meaning you pick someone from a state in order to maybe secure that state for you, are a little bit overrated. The last big geographic pick we saw was when John Kennedy picked Lyndon Johnson back in 1960 to help secure the South. Well, I mean, that was 60 years ago. Yeah. So it happens. It's just a little less common now. Think of the last few high-profile ones. George W. Bush picks Dick Cheney, who's from Wyoming. Not geographical, but more to kind of assure people who are worried that George W. Bush might be too inexperienced. Barack Obama picks Joe Biden, again, Delaware, not a swing state. Again, to sort of reinforce that idea that he's got a trusted hand at the wheel beside him. That's not Biden's calculation. That said, if he does want to pick someone from the Midwest, there are a few options. I think at the top of that list probably is Tammy Duckworth, the senator from Illinois. This is someone who lost both legs. She was a helicopter pilot in Iraq, was shot down by an RPG, lost both legs, has since gone on to represent Illinois in the House and the Senate. Is someone who is the first sitting senator to give birth. Amazing personal story. You've also got Tammy Baldwin, who's from a senator from Wisconsin. Again, Wisconsin, huge swing state. Baldwin reelected convincingly in 2018. And then outside chance, I think, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Again, she's from a gigantic Midwestern state that Donald Trump won in 2016. That Joe Biden would like to win in 2020. But Whitmer's had a very up and down press run in terms of dealing with the coronavirus in the state. I don't know if she makes the cut.
Joe Biden will be 78 on Inauguration Day. And I'm wondering, Elizabeth Warren just turned 71. She'll be 72 next spring. Is that why we haven't heard much about her? Because when they start to do those numbers together, maybe two 70-year-old white people from the Northeast is not a way to go?
Yeah. I do. And again, I think, Dennis, it's so important that you emphasize Biden's age, right? This will be, if he is elected, by far the oldest person ever elected to a first term. Donald Trump set that record in 2016. He was 72. Biden'd be 6 years older. He'd be in his 80s if he went to run for a second term. And Biden has openly acknowledged that. I mean, he said, look, I am not someone who is the future of the Democratic Party. I view myself as sort of a bridge between the older Democratic Party and the new Democratic Party. Well, that makes the pick of the VP theoretically someone who represents that new face of the Democratic Party. I think that's why we haven't heard as much about Warren, because as you point out, while she is younger certainly than Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, she is not young by most standards. The other point I'll make about Elizabeth Warren, Dennis, is she and Joe Biden do not see eye to eye ideologically.
True.
Biden has said it's very important to have someone who views the world of politics in the way he does. And what he means by that is sort of a pragmatic, let's get to compromise view of the world. That's not been Elizabeth Warren's MO, either in the Senate or in the 2020 presidential race. So I'm skeptical that he goes that route. I've got her in the top 5 just because she's such a big national presence. Liberals love her. She clearly can raise money, but I'm skeptical he goes there.
Once they do the vetting and they ask who you took to your prom 30 years ago and so forth, and look at your tax returns, do they do any polling or focus groups?
They don't do any active polling typically, and the reason for that is because of the danger of it leaking out, right? If they happen to call someone who was a cousin of mine and that person emailed me and said, hey, I got a call from Joe Biden's campaign, well, that would give us a big clue as to who they're kind of narrowing down. They may do some focus group work, a smaller group, 10, 12 people, to walk voters through what each person would look like. I don't know if they would go through specific names and that kind of thing, Dennis. They might say, oh, what would you think about putting a Midwestern governor on the ticket with Vice President Biden? So this is, even in this age in which everything is sort of public, this is the most closely held of secrets in the campaign. That said, we're getting to the point. Joe Biden has said he expects to know who he wants to pick or make a decision by early August. We're not that far from it. And I think we've gotten some indication of where he's headed. I tend to think he's much more likely to pick a woman of color than a white woman. And that's why I have Harris, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, and Florida Congresswoman Val Demings as my top 3.
Final question for you, and it's never too early, as you always say, to talk about the next presidential election. We're already thinking about 2024 here in Connecticut because we want to see how we get our primary to matter. What do you think the state should do in terms of perhaps moving it up or getting it to a more pivotal time?
Well, look, I think that what happened, and again, it's so hard to remember some of these things, even though they didn't happen all that long ago, because of the coronavirus has sort of blotted out everything since March until now. But remember how badly the Iowa caucus worked out, right? It was they couldn't declare a winner. The results took days. The chairman of the Iowa Democratic Party was forced to resign. My guess is that means that in 2024, particularly if it's on the Democratic side, you'll see there be a real push to move to not have Iowa have permanent first in the nation status. The only complicating thing for Connecticut is go north, drive a few hours north to New Hampshire. Bill Gardner, the Secretary of State in New Hampshire, he has total control of setting that primary as the first in the nation. He could literally move it whenever. He could move it till December of this year if he needed to. That's hard because it's close enough. I still think the best way to do this is regionally, a rotating regional primary system. So 1 year New England gets to be on that first primary day. Then the next year, the Mid-Atlantic. Then another year, the West, and the Southwest, and the West. That, to me, seems the fairest, that we kind of rotate it around like that. I don't know if we're to the point where we're going to see that level of reform, but I don't think Iowa will have the supremacy it once did.
Well, Governor Lamont is certainly on board with an earlier primary. Chris Cillizza, we always love having you here. It's been a long time. We'll have you on again. And I also want to welcome our viewers to check out, in addition to politics, you've also written some very courageous articles on your dad. And again, I'm sorry to hear about his passing, and anxiety. Yep. So I encourage people to Google those articles, or I think they're on your pinned tweets on your Twitter page.
They're on Medium. Yeah. Thanks, Dennis. And thanks about my dad. My parents, my dad, my late dad, and certainly my mom still are loyal watchers. So you had two, and you still have one in your corner.
All right, Mrs. Cillizza, thanks for watching. Thanks, Chris. All right, I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. When we come back, we'll talk with Tim Moore, black business owner, about what he wants to do in the city of Hartford. And we welcome your comments on social media right now.